name is Lydia Kostopoulos, and I'm a strategy and emerging technologies advisor with a deep passion for body data tracking and human performance. This set of healthy aging protocol interviews delves into perimenopause, specifically the perimenopause game plan. Such an important life event that women experience requires a game plan, is my thought. And so in this series, I'll be interviewing people to ask them, what is their game plan? How are they going through it? How are they preparing for it? How are they posturing for it? I hope you enjoy these set of interviews. Hi, Anne-Marie. Thank you so much for joining me to have a conversation about healthy aging protocols and a perimenopause game plan. First, I would love it if you could introduce yourself.
Well, my name is Marie McQueen. I'm a journalist here in Abu Dhabi. I'm a Canadian journalist, and I've spent half my career in Canada and half my career in the Middle East. And I've focused a lot on health, wellness, science in my career, which is almost 30 years now. And when I realized I was in perimenopause, I started researching and looking for more information, and I couldn't really find what I wanted. So then I started thinking about researching that and making that my beat in my business, which I'm in the middle of doing now.
And that is called Hot Flash Inc. Could you say a little bit about what that's all about?
Sure. It started out as a newsletter and all the social media. I've added a podcast, and it's really become a platform to talk about the whole transition, which is like a mind, body, soul transition. And in the time since I launched it in 2020, obviously the menopause conversation has blown open in many parts of the world. And with it, a large commercial aspect and a couple of pretty big narratives. And so I'm just sort of sitting in the middle saying, okay, but that's not really true. That's sort of self-serving, that you might want to be careful there, and looking at the research and the lack of research that we have, and just trying to help provide as much helpful information as I can to help people in the way that I didn't have when I was going
Well,
through
I'm
it.
glad you're doing that, because we need more awareness on this issue that half the population experiences. So before we talk about your perimenopause game plan, I'd love to first hear about your healthy aging protocol. What is it?
I'm kind of a funny person because I lost my mom when she was 53 and I was 27, and I'm 53 now. And I think a lot of people who lose their parents young can attest to the fact that you can't really imagine yourself older than them, older than that age. So to me, I really couldn't look past 53 in terms of making like long-term plans. But luckily, I have been obsessed, probably because of her death of pancreatic cancer, but she was very ill with a lot of other things. I've just been obsessed with like, why are some people more well than others? Why are some people why does some people struggle so much with autoimmune issues and gynecological issues? And I was really obsessed with it for a long time, maybe in an unhealthy way. So anyway, all that to say, healthy aging protocol is something I've put together very recently. It's not like a long-term thing. I've just been doing things to be healthy. It's only as I've gotten 52, 51, 53 now, and I can see the signs of aging in myself, that I've gotten a lot more intentional about the things that I want to do. And so I got to the bottom of all sort of niggling and some more serious health concerns. I had thyroid issues, I had fatty liver, I had prediabetes, I had insulin resistance, and I had a leaky gut. And I'm a really healthy person. So I was sort of limping along with those, thinking it was perimenopause. And when I took the time to figure out what was going on and then find the right doctor to heal me from it, that has made the world of difference. I think figuring out if you have insulin resistance or if prediabetes is probably one of the top things you can do, because we know that metabolic dysfunction feeds into all of almost like the diseases that we all fear, right? Like you're just way ahead of the game if you don't have those things. So now I know, and I'm going to stay on top of it. I'd had those first insulin resistant signals a couple of years ago, but I was busy and no one's really flagging it for me. The doctors are like, it's fine. So there's that. And once I started feeling better, I started strength training. And I've gotten quite into strength training. And I was like aiming to do it 5 days a week, because that's what you hear. You need to do so much weights, and it's the best thing you can do. And I was weights and walking. And I just came across a pretty big meta-analysis from the spring that looks at all the research on weightlifting and concludes that actually after about 60 minutes a week, there's sort of a diminishing law of returns, and that can negatively impact your longevity. So I've decided I'm going to weight lift 3 times a week for 20, 30 minutes at a time, and that will be good. I'll give it all my effort. So that the most compelling research was done at Harvard University, and it's long term, and connection and family, like relationships, always come out on top. So I'm single, but I still think that you can have like those connections and those good relationships when you're single. You just have to work a little bit harder at it. So I know a lot of people who are in unhappy relationships, and I don't think that's healthy either. So I'm just making a huge effort to not be isolated, to have more of a community, which I do with Hot Flash, to see people, on the weekend, to make sure I have coffee or go for a yoga class with a friend and just connect. And then I worked a lot on my relationship with myself and healing trauma and drama from my past, and processing emotions in the time of things that are happening. So processing when I've been hurt, in the past, I would have just been like, it's fine, it's fine. I think all those things are really healthy, and I feel like they're important for aging, and sometimes people don't talk about them. So.
Well, it sounds lovely. So basically, it's as if 50-51 was this kind of awakening moment for you, and you're like, I need a healthy aging, an intentional kind of healthy aging protocol. And then you went all in on the metabolic health and the physical health, and then also the emotional aspects of it. And these are things that you continue to do today. But I wonder now about your perimenopause game plan. So you have this healthy aging protocol, but then perimenopause has its own other items to address and deal with. So what did you do? How did you figure out some sort of kind of game plan routine that helped you in perimenopause?
So I didn't know I was in perimenopause for a really long time. I just found a note I wrote on my phone in 2016, and I titled it like "In England Suffering." And then I put a bunch of the things that I was experiencing, and they were weird. They were like, my fingers are tingling. My head feels weird. I've got that pain in my toe. Like, they were things like that. And I was like trying to psych up the nerve to bring that information to a doctor. I had headaches on there. I had sleep. So, a lot of that time until about 2017, I didn't know what was wrong with me. And I had a real focus on my health. I became, I don't know, the term that it's always been called is like a hypochondriac, but I became very worried all the time. And I think this is really common for women in perimenopause, where you just don't know what's up with you. And so you think that you're dying a lot of the time. You have a weird feeling in your head. You've got itchy here. You've got this. You sometimes, I would get just like tingling on various parts of my body. And if you mention it to anyone, they're like, oh, well, that could be an aneurysm. Like I literally would think, what's happening to me? Like, what is going on? So if I could tell anyone to have a game plan, I just want women in their 30s to know that this can happen, to not be scared of it, but just to be aware of it, so that, you can sort of twig for yourself, rather than where I was wandering in the wilderness for 6 years and going to see doctors probably over 12. I was in the ER for headaches. I was in the ER for chest pains once. And no one ever said, you're a woman in her 40s and you could be going through perimenopause. This can trigger a whole array of symptoms because your hormones govern everything. So just to know about it, I think would be the number one thing.
When did you realize that you were in perimenopause? Because it's kind of hard to have a game plan when you don't know that you're already in the game.
I realized at 47 when I skipped a period, like my first period. And then I was like, oh, okay. And I had skipped a couple of periods in my 40s, but I could always explain it away by international travel, because that sometimes screws up your cycle when I would fly from Canada to here. So, and who knows if that was it or not. That's when I knew. But I, during the time, I did develop a lot of protocols. I just didn't know they were about perimenopause. So if there's one thing that I wish I could go back and do differently, it really hit me hard with the anxiety, with the sleep, with waking up in the middle of the night from nightmares, just really panic. And I wish I had known that, because that's pretty obviously the receding progesterone. That's progesterone governs your stress response, that HPA axis. And if I had known that, you can just sort of take some progesterone, and that can really, really help. And I don't know if I was taking magnesium back then, and that can really help. So I think it's really, I just love people to be aware that A, perimenopause can start earlier than you think, and B, people say it's all about estrogen, but really the earliest stages are about the receding progesterone and how that impacts your stress response. And, it can be rising and falling estrogen. And other within that, I just sort of worked through everything that happened in real time, not knowing what was going on. So, I always say people bring, what you bring to perimenopause can really impact how you experience perimenopause. And if you're a person, everyone's going to have their own thing. And my thing was that I didn't properly process my emotions, and I never really had. So I had experienced IBS since my early 30s. And I think as a direct result of just like being under emotional stress, never processing the emotional stress, and then doing things to deal with anxiety and stress, like over exercising, binge drinking, busyness, overwork, just like being very, very hard on myself. So I had, childhood, adverse childhood experiences. And I'm recently discovering probably some trauma from the early parts of my career from things I saw in journalism, like accident scenes and murders and terrible court cases I covered, and things that I didn't know how to process or talk about. And I didn't have anyone to talk about them with. So I went into therapy for 4 years and worked through a lot of things and learned about my childhood. So that was the beginning of that, but I didn't really begin to work through it. I just talked about it and realized what was going on. I developed my own protocols because I would wake up in the middle of the night with these nightmares, or I would just wake up startled. I would often wake up with what I call the feeling of morning doom, which is just like you open your eyes and everything's fine. And then like, dun, dun, dun. And I also had what I call perimenopause doom drops, where everything would be fine. I'd just be out for dinner with my friend, and then I'd have an intrusive thought like your apartment's burning down, or, your family's not okay, like really bad intrusive thoughts. And this is my own psychology, but it definitely is intertwined with the hormonal changes. So I just developed my own coping mechanisms for this stuff, which is one of them was like talking to myself, like like for those sort of intrusive thoughts, like these aren't real. This makes no sense. Like, just take deep breaths, that kind of thing. Waking up in the middle of the night, I developed a whole protocol, because when everyone wakes up in the middle of the night, your first thought is like, I'm not going to get back to sleep. My whole day is going to be ruined. Then the whole week's going to be ruined, and blah, 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 blah. So I just developed like, I would just be like, it's fine. I'm just awake for a little bit. I'll fall back asleep. I started making a cup of chamomile tea and leaving it by the bed. I would drink that. I would tell myself I'm going to get back to sleep. I would sniff some lavender. I would do this little thing where I saw where you go 3 fingers down from the top of your wrist, and you put your finger in here, and it sort of like calms your heart chakra down. Does it ever? And then I would do a sort of box breathing, or 4-3-7, I think, breathing, just some kind of very slow inhale, hold, and then exhale. And then I would usually go back to sleep, as opposed to freaking out. And I know these things are kind of simple, but they're not, because when you don't sleep one night and you don't sleep the next night, it's just, and I developed a morning routine way before people have always talked about morning routines, but it's like really hot right now. And I had one way before, because I just had to prepare, because if I would give in to those feelings of doom, that would descend. And many women talk about this, then the day would go sideways. So those sorts of things. And I also had a lot of very bad physical body pain. And a lot of women have this. There's a Dr. Vonda Wright. She's an orthopedic surgeon in the US. She sort of wants to rename this osteoporosis, osteopenia, and all this body muscle pain that women experience as sort of musculoskeletal syndrome of menopause, which I think would be really cool to call it something, because I was in tremendous physical pain a lot of the time. And it hurt to roll over in bed at some points. And by the way, these things weren't all concurrent. They weren't happening all at the same time. Like the anxiety was like more in the beginning, and then the body pain, and then the anxiety lessened, but it was still there. For the body pain, I had no idea what to do. I actually tried cryotherapy, and it worked, but it's very expensive, and no one was doing ice baths then. and I'm not one to take a lot of medication. And then I found out about the Whole30 diet, and I went on it because I heard that you could reduce pain, and I did by about 80%. So that taught me, okay, if you're not drinking alcohol, you're not eating sugar, you're not eating, simple carbs, this is very much contributing to this pain. Why? I'm not quite sure, but that's when I started to realize that those things really sort of agitated and didn't do well with me. So those were all, it sounds like a lot, but it's a time to clean up, it's really a time to clean up.
Well, I mean, I'm reading a lot of books about perimenopause, and it is a lot. I mean, the doctors are explaining like a long list of symptoms from depression and anxiety to headaches to heart palpitations to incontinence. And that's actually something I wanted to talk to you about. I know that you worked on Kegels, and this element, this physical element of health, was an important part of confidence. Could you share a little bit about like what you were doing to kind of manage that aspect?
Yeah. So I always thought, well, I never had kids. So I thought, well, I'm never going to have any problems with that. And I just literally, and when I was 30, ever since I was 30, I was like, I should be doing Kegels. You've been reading about Kegels, and I always meant to, but I just didn't. Of all the things you do with your life, I hadn't done them. And I'm doing them all the time now, and I just don't know why I didn't do them, because they're so easy when you're driving somewhere or whatever. And then around my late 40s, I was a big fan of trampoline workouts, and I just started to notice, I love these trampoline workouts, but I started to notice that my like undercarriage sort of felt like it wasn't connected to my body. And because I've always darted around and dashed around and not been so connected to myself, I'm just like, oh, that's weird. Part of the last couple of years has really been connecting with my body.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've only come to that in the last couple of years, and really last year and this year. And I'm going to make, this year for Hot Flash Inc., like the year we put our vaginas first, because I think there's just way too many of us walking around like numb or disconnected. I don't think men do this, they're men, and men are just, their anatomy is like a part of them. And I think we need to lean in more to having that connection. So I started to have a little bit of leaks just at night, just that feeling. And then that feeling when I was jumping on the trampoline, that made it just feel like it was moving also, So I went to see a pelvic floor specialist at the end of last year, and she got me set up with like the right Kegels to do. And I've been doing those. And I had also signed up for this course from this woman, Kim Anime. She's a vagina weightlifter. So she's on Instagram, always lifting these things out of her vagina, like toasters and chandeliers and stuff. And I followed her for a really long time. And in 2021, I bought her course, Vagina Kung Fu, and I didn't do it, but I have lifetime access to it. And so I started it. I started it at the beginning of January, and it's really interesting. Like, it's a jade egg, which is controversial, but I feel perfectly fine using it. And so I'm doing all those things to deal with, some very slight leaks at night, which I could just ignore, but more to like just continue the work of like integrating my whole self. And we pay attention to our mind, we pay attention to our heart, we pay attention to our guts now. Why are we not paying attention to this? It's like the essence of us. So that's something I'm doing. And I think, the mainstream sort of social media talk is like, I haven't had any problems with pain or dryness, which, it's different for everyone, Lydia. That's the thing. It's like, I've had friends who've had terrible vaginal dryness, and they have great sex lives with their husbands, but they can't have sex, and they've gone and got hormone therapy. But I just think it's just really important that we put this area first. And what you hear is like, get some lube, get some vaginal estrogen, get a vibrator. That's the mainstream recommendation for the perimenopausal woman. And I just think that's so short-sighted. I just think there's a lot more going on. You can't really separate like everything that's happened to you sexually in your life, and how you've processed that. And you can't, how you feel about your all of you, and how you feel about your sexuality. These things are all very, very important. And I think that conversation needs to be a lot richer and broader. So that's kind of where I'm at. The year we put our vaginas first.
No, this is amazing. And it sounds like your perimenopause game plan kind of got off to a rocky start, but then you like really came in strong at the end, and now you are building on everything. And one of the things that it sounds like you would tell your younger self is like vagina first. Think about that. Don't worry about everything else as well. And then there's something else that I know that was a key part of the mental emotional health piece that you are continuing to work on, which is the purpose part and like friends. If you could just expand on that.
I mean, this is the time of life where everything is happening. And, you have aging parents and people have young kids. But also, I think you're sort of hitting a point in your career where perhaps you didn't anticipate, where you've had success. And you may have, as what I experienced was golden handcuffs. I always heard that term when I was young from my parents, but it's sort of a point where, you've got a good job and you've got a good paying job, but maybe your heart's not as into it and you're not as jazzed by it. And I was fired up by my career right up into my 40s. I became an editor. I ran an arts and life section. It was like, I loved it. But then I just sort of, slowly didn't. And then I had a promotion. So I did even less of the stuff I loved. And then I had a real sort of, what am I doing with my life? And the things I did to entertain myself weren't working for me, like going to brunches and drinking with my friends and stuff like that. And you just have a kind of a feeling, and at the same time, some of your friendships are changing. And so I think really at this point, one of the smartest and most self-serving, and I mean that in a positive way, things we can do is find our purpose, figure out what we're really here for. And it may have something to do with your career and it may not. And it may be very simple, but a sense of purpose, I think, is a great anti-aging plan or a longevity plan, because when you're fired up, when you've got something going on, it just makes you alive. And when you're lacking that, you're really adrift. So I think everyone can find it, but I see some of my cohort, not wanting to find it because they've got a good paying job and they don't want to change. And I understand that because change is really scary and unsettling. I'm in the middle of change right now. And although I don't have the perimenopausal anxiety, it has been anxious. It's an anxious time. That's what change is, right? It's scary. And so, but I think it's very, very important. And it's right up there, on disease prevention and longevity research findings as well, is having a sense of purpose. Of course it does. Of course it is. So, deciding I wanted to do hot flash, just like growing that, just becoming like focused on it has been like great for me. It's just been a really, really cool thing.
I think there's a lot to be said about having a reason to get out of bed, and that purpose falls in line with that. And so if I could then summarize, so we've got the healthy aging protocol that you have developed at 50-51 because you woke up and decided life's changing, my body's changing, and I want to have something more concrete. And it's around strength training and working out. It's around sleep, and then like the emotional health. But then with the end of perimenopause, you kind of started becoming more adamant about other aspects that were more perimenopause related around the anxiety and coping with that and how it affected your sleep. So figuring out, and it sounds like you were figuring out on the go, like different strategies, like trying the lavender, trying the chamomile, self-talk, soothing self-talk. And then with the vaginal element, you tried all kinds of exercises, and now you're vagina weightlifting. Is that what that's called?
Yeah, I think we're going to be doing some weightlifting. Yeah.
and then really kind of like having that purpose. And so I really look forward to seeing how you continue to update and amend your healthy aging protocol. But I really appreciate you taking the time to share both that and your perimenopause game plan as it happened on the go.
That's awesome. And if I could just say, as you were summing up, I realized one really big piece, and that's come in the last 2 years. And that is the unearthing, like all the shadow parts of you, connecting with your inner child, I've done somatic work, breath work. I think connecting with the dark side of yourself and learning that you have an inner child that needs attention and learning to feel your emotions, those have been absolute keys. And I think that's part of the sort of hero's journey of midlife for men and women. So.
Oh my gosh, I love how you framed that. The hero's journey of midlife. That sounds so lovely. You have to write an article about this.
Yeah.
The hero's journey
lovely.
of midlife.
It's not.
No, I mean, but it's
yeah, it is. I mean,
arc. It's a storyline that we can relate to.
Yeah. I mean, I have to delve more into it, but Carl Jung did investigate this and talk about it a lot. And I took when I was searching for my purpose, I took a screenwriting course in my mid 40s and I wrote a screenplay, and we learned about the hero's journey, which, Joseph Campbell talked about and sort of plotted out that in Greek mythology, there's sort of this like commonalities between all of the gods and what they went through. But it's at the heart of every book you've read or movie you've ever watched, where a hero is sort of called to this journey. And I think the journey is self-discovery. And I think it's one of the keys of making it through this time. And it's for men and women, but I think we ignore that call to figure this stuff out at our peril. And I think that we need to pay attention to it. And there is some peace and freedom on the other side. I can attest. It's never over, but it's a good feeling to sort of start to figure some of that stuff out.
It's a journey for sure. And if people wanted to follow your work, Hot Flash Inc., and anything else you do, where can they find you?
My website is Hot Flash Inc., Hot Flash Inc. across all socials, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, on YouTube. And I'm on Substack. My newsletter comes out on Substack. So you can just search Hot Flash Inc. there. And I have a Fix It Fast perimenopause list at my website, hotflashinc.com. And that's 14 evidence-based ways that you can start feeling better really quickly.
That's awesome. I'm going to check it out. Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for taking the time to find out about this stuff. I love it.
This series is meant to capture personal stories of individual healthy aging protocols and is for informational purposes only, and it does not constitute providing medical advice or professional services. Those seeking personal medical advice should consult with a licensed healthcare practitioner.